Live happily with your lover. It's been a week since my beloved wife left this note and vanished. I stand motionless in the room, holding our engagement ring. How did it come to this? My name is James, a 43-year-old office worker. My wife, Sarah, also 43, is a housewife. Though we were never blessed with children, our life together was pure happiness. We traveled a lot together, and on days off from work, we go shopping or dine out. Of course, during our long marriage, we had our arguments, but we always made it a point to apologize if we felt we were wrong and reconciled by the end of the day. We frequently visited each other's parents' homes and had a great relationship with our in-laws. There seemed to be no issues. I always believed that our calm, happy days with my wife would last forever. However, the end of my blissful marital life with my loving wife came suddenly. When I returned home from work, the lights were off. Usually, since Sarah was home, the lights would be on, but that wasn't all. The front door, which would normally be locked, was unlocked, and there was no smell of a delicious dinner at all. Thinking she might be out, I called her cell phone, but she didn't answer. She didn't even read my messages. An hour passed, then 2, but Sarah did not return. Something felt very off. That's when I noticed it. Sitting down on the couch, there was a piece of paper in Sarah's handwriting. It read, "Live happily with your lover." Of course, I had never cheated. She must have misunderstood something. I needed to meet her and talk. Sarah isn't the type to socialize much. It is probably the family home that she would rely on in these situations. I immediately called her mother, Karen. "Karen, it's James. By any chance, is Sarah with you?" "Oh, James, you are back. Sarah isn't here, but I know where she is. However, she told me not to tell you." I was at a loss as to why she would say that. "What do you mean?" "She seems to suspect me of cheating, but I haven't done anything of the sort. I think she's misunderstood. I need to meet her and talk." I knew from Karen that she knew where Sarah was, so I begged Karen multiple times to let me see her, but Karen didn't tell me. "James, she didn't tell me in detail, but she said she'd thought about this for days. I understand you want to talk, but please give her some space right now." There was nothing I could say to that, but of course, I couldn't just accept it. Even now, I wonder if my wife thinks I'm meeting with another woman. If only I could see her and clear up the misunderstanding. Nothing progressed, and a week has passed. My wife hasn't returned. I took out the engagement ring from the bedroom closet. I was planning to give this ring to my wife today on our 20th wedding anniversary. Truth is, I didn't have money when we got married. I couldn't afford an engagement ring, and we couldn't even have a wedding. I'm not into flashy things, so I don't need a ring or a wedding. Let's use that money for our daily expenses. That was a thoughtful proposal from my gentle wife, sensing our financial situation. Now that we're comfortable, I can gift it to her. But having a wedding at this age feels embarrassing. Yet, I wanted to properly convey my gratitude for these 20 years to my wife. This engagement ring was for that. During these 20 years, whether we were broke or distressed about not having children, she always stood by me and supported me. Will this ring, which I had prepared hoping for our continued happiness, ever fit on her finger? I held the engagement ring in my hand, feeling lost in our home. One day, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, there stood a beautiful elderly woman I didn't recognize. As I was puzzled, the elegant old lady said, "I've been looking for you." I was more confused. Then she continued, "Nice to meet you. My name is Amy. I came here about your uncle. He mentioned wanting to leave you some assets. My deceased father only had a sister. My mother had no siblings. In other words, I don't have an uncle." I thought that she must have mistaken me for someone else and told Amy that I do not have an uncle. I figured she would leave after that, but Amy slowly shook her head. "No, I am sure it's you. Your mother will understand. What I mean is, your mother's name is Catherine. Can I please see her?" Indeed, my mother's name was Catherine. However, I was hesitant to introduce her to a stranger. I thought I'd call my mother. If she also said she didn't know Amy, then Amy would surely give up. So I called my mother. After explaining the situation, my mother was silent for a while. "Bring her to the house." I was taken aback by my mother's words. "What do you know, Amy? Besides, you don't have any siblings, right? Just bring her. We'll talk later." Could my mother possibly know something about Amy's story? Still confused, I brought Amy to our family home. My mother was waiting outside. As soon as she saw Amy, she exclaimed, "Amy." To my surprise, Amy also said, "It's been so long," with tears in her eyes. The two embraced tightly. After their embrace, my mother invited Amy inside. When I demanded an explanation, it wasn't Amy who started speaking, but my mother. My father was the CEO of a real estate company. Amy here used to be our housemate. We've been close since I was young. My brother was supposed to take over the company, but one day my father arranged a marriage for me. However, I had a boyfriend at that time, your late father. I found out that I was pregnant with his child around the same time the proposal came. That child was you. My father told me to abort the child and marry the man he had chosen, but I couldn't bear to abort my child or leave him, so I left home, almost eloping. I didn't tell anyone, not even my brother or Amy, where I was going, thinking I'd never see them again. I had no idea my mother was the daughter of a CEO. I had never heard about her eloping before. When Catherine left home, I was devastated, but I believed she would be happier with the man she loved, so I kept my silence. I'm glad she had a happy marriage with him. Amy looked very relieved. She must have been worried about my mother all this time. I'm glad to see you, but why visit after all these years? Well, I have some sad news to share with you, Catherine. Saying that, Amy told my mother that her brother had passed away. Yes, my brother. He probably had a tough time managing everything after I left. He was the one who took care of our parents in their final years. I'm really grateful to him. As my mother teared up, Amy gently handed her a handkerchief. It must have been a shock to be told out of the blue that her brother had passed away. I comforted my crying mother. My uncle, my mother's brother, my mother said, regretted not being able to help when my mother left home. He didn't have any children, so he wanted to leave some assets for his sister and nephew. So he asked Amy and her daughter, who was also his secretary, named Alice, to locate us. My mother and I were truly touched by my uncle's kindness. However, both of us and Amy agreed it would be best to decline the inheritance. My mother was now enjoying her retirement years, and she didn't need excessive money. As for me, I wanted to make my precious wife happy with what I earned, conveying our feelings. Amy respected our decision. Catherine, you're still as kind-hearted as ever, and James, you're such a gentle soul. Your wife must be very lucky. At Amy's words, my expression stiffened. That wasn't the case. My wife had left me suddenly. Feeling downcast, I shared with Amy that my wife had left a week ago, but I truly never cheated on her. I don't even know why she suspected me of infidelity, I murmured. Could it be? Amy began dialing a number. After speaking to her daughter Alice, Amy handed the phone over to me. Hello, this is Alice, Amy's daughter. I've heard the story. The misunderstanding your wife has might be because of me. About a week ago, I called your house. I had finally found out where you were, and I was quite anxious. I probably didn't explain things well to your wife. I told her I needed to talk to James since he's someone important to me. When she asked why, I thought it would be best to speak with you first, so I told her I couldn't explain at the moment. Looking back, she sounded quite upset throughout the call, and she might have mistaken me as someone you were having an affair with. Hearing that, everything clicked for me. I immediately called my mother-in-law, Karen. After Amy explained the situation over the phone, the misunderstanding that my wife might have mistaken Alice as the other woman was cleared up. I'll try to get in touch with Sarah right away, Karen assured. True to her word, Karen quickly explained the misunderstanding to Sarah and brought her to her parents' home that evening. I'm sorry, I jumped to conclusions. So you weren't cheating on me? Sarah said, looking apologetic. I was worried. Why would you suspect me of cheating just because of one phone call? If you had doubts, you could have just asked me. It wasn't just the call from Alice. I found an engagement ring hidden in the closet. It's not mine, so I thought you might give it to the other woman. I wanted to ask you about it, but you've been so distant lately. I remembered acting distant when we first got married. I couldn't afford to buy a ring, so for our 20th anniversary, I had saved up and planned to give her one. But I was quite embarrassed about the whole thing. It was my first time planning such a surprise, and I thought that if I talked to her about it, she might find out. So I ended up being distant with her, trying to keep it a secret. But I had no idea it hurt her feelings so much. Also, you love kids. I thought, since I can't get pregnant, you might have found someone else. But I thought if that's the case, it can't be helped. So I left a note and left the house. I had prepared the ring as a token of my gratitude for all the years together, but little did I know it would lead her to suspect me of cheating. I told her about my regret of not being able to afford a ring or a proper wedding when we first got married, and that I had prepared this ring for our 20th anniversary. I don't care at all about not having kids. I'm very happy with just the two of us. During the times we struggled financially, your support was invaluable. I'm really grateful for everything. Let's continue to live happily together. With that, I presented her with the small box containing the ring. I'm so glad I married you. From now on, I won't keep things to myself and will always discuss with you. Those words meant the world to me. I told my wife about my uncle's intention to leave us some inheritance, but she felt just like I did that it would be best to decline. However, we were touched by my uncle's kindness. Both of us and my mother were delighted that our ties with the relatives were rekindled. My mother had been regretting not being able to visit her parents' graves after falling out with them. Later on, my wife and I, along with my mother, visited the graves of my grandparents and my uncle. I'm set to meet with Amy and Alice after our visit to the gravesite. I had asked them to share stories about my mom's parents and her brother. It seems my mom's parents were a loving couple until the day they passed. I hope that Sarah and I can live just as happily together. It's been a long time since I've had the morning rush hour. The subway was jam-packed as I got off at the station. Large groups of strangers moved like a flock of sheep, each heading to their own destination. In the midst of that crowd, I truly felt, I'm back in New York. It was my first day back at the headquarters in New York after working in Nebraska for 3 years. Nebraska had its own charms, but I've always had a soft spot for the hustle and bustle of New York. It wasn't because I messed up or got demoted that I was transferred to Nebraska. The company I joined right out of college believed in sending their bright ones away to gain experience, and working in a regional office was a stepping stone to promotions. At 35, I was assigned to work in Nebraska. After 3 years, I was called back to headquarters, where a position as a deputy director awaited me. So professionally, everything was going great for me. But there was one thing bothering me in my personal life. At this age, I was still single and didn't even have a girlfriend. Up until just before the transfer, I had a girlfriend who I had been with for almost 10 years, considering marriage. But whether it was a phase of fatigue or just growing apart, we broke up when I got the transfer. When I reported to my old department, everyone welcomed me back with applause. Especially the director, who had been instrumental in my career path, was overjoyed. He said, "Next, I'll be the executive director, and you'll be the director." That evening, a welcome back party was thrown in my honor, orchestrated by the director. Not to pry into your personal life, but do you have any marriage plans, Alex? The director asked during the party. Ever since I joined the company, I'd been in the same department as the director, who was just a supervisor at the time. We went out for drinks countless times. However, we rarely talked about our personal lives. Oh, sorry about that. I might have been too nosy. Well, it's not really that. I didn't have anyone in my plans. Then I told him that I had broken up with my long-term girlfriend just before I was transferred to another state. Upon hearing this, the director felt guilty, wondering if it was because he recommended the transfer. I replied, "Sooner or later, we would have broken up anyway." "So you're not seeing anyone now?" "No, not for the past 3 years." When I said that, for some reason, the director had a pleased smile on his face. "Well then, I've got a perfect match for you, Alex. How about an arranged date?" Caught off guard, I almost spit out my drink. An arranged date. Who does that these days? Actually, my nosy relative asked me to find someone for a match. The director rummaged through his bag, which he had placed on his lap. Saying that, he handed me a photo he had been carrying in his bag. I don't think arranged dates are really my thing. Just take a look at her photo. She's a catch, really. The woman in the photo was just as the director described, strikingly beautiful with sharp eyes, both wise and elegant. She was exactly my type. I can't just introduce anyone without thinking it through, especially when it's such a big deal for someone. But Alex, what do you say? It's okay to refuse. Want meet her? It was hard to decline the director's proposal, especially considering all the help he's provided over the years. Yet more than that, I was captivated by the woman in the photo and simply wanted to meet her. The following weekend, at a somewhat renowned hotel lounge in downtown New York, under the watchful eyes of the director's meddling relative, the arranged date took place. I was in a suit, she was in a dress. Her name is Catherine, and she's 35 minutes 3 years younger than me. She used to work in an administrative position at a major electronics company. After about 15 minutes, our companions left the table, and it was just Catherine and me. I pondered on what to say next as I carefully admired her face. She looked even prettier than in her photos. "Alex, there's something I wanted to ask first." "Oh, what is it, Alex?" "Have you ever been on an arranged date before?" I was actually thinking of asking her the same thing. I told her it was my first time and asked her the same. She also said it was her first. "With someone as charming as you, I'm surprised you'd need to go on an arranged date. Wouldn't you have plenty of suitors?" "Oh, you're too kind." Her tone was gentle, but Catherine gave me a stern look. She probably thought I was being insincere and got upset, but that assertive side of hers was quite attractive to me. "Did I say something you didn't like? I wasn't trying to butter you up, honestly." I then shared with her about my long-term relationship ending due to a job in another state, how I came back to the headquarters, got this arranged date offer from my department head, and how her photo made me want to meet her. At first, I laughed at the idea of an arranged date, but it's just another way to meet people. Even those group dates I went to when I was younger felt like group arranged dates. As I continued to share, Catherine's expression softened. "You broke up with your previous girlfriend 3 years ago?" "Yeah, right. When?" "In September, sometime in September, I guess." With my answer, Catherine smirked. Curious, I looked at her. "Actually, I broke up with my long-term boyfriend in September, 3 years ago too." I was at a loss for words at Catherine's unexpected confession. "Did you get over your ex?" "Yes, of course." "And you?" "A long time ago," Catherine said, smiling. I couldn't help but smile too. And so our arranged date came to an end, and we agreed to meet again the following weekend. I was so eager to see Catherine again that I felt restless the entire week. Every night after work, I'd think about what to wear. I never used to care much about fashion. I was quite indecisive. As I was looking through my closet, I decided on a suit without a tie. Then a thought popped into my head. What about underwear? I quickly came back to my senses. I'm such an idiot. Worrying about that was way too premature for our first date. We met at 4:00 p.m. near an established department store close to the hotel where we had our arranged date. We planned to stroll around town for a bit and then find a decent restaurant for dinner. I could have booked a place in advance, but since I didn't know Catherine's preferences, I thought we'd decide on the go. Of course, I did some research and had shortlisted a few places that seemed good. So I arrived in that town over an hour earlier than our scheduled time and checked the location of the restaurant I had in mind. After doing that, I went to the place where I was supposed to meet her. But even after our 4:00 p.m. meeting time, she was nowhere in sight. 10 minutes passed, then 20 minutes. I thought she might have stood me up. I was about to give up and head home when I started crossing the street. I thought of calling her to give her a piece of my mind while walking. Then from the other side of the intersection, I spotted her walking towards me with her cell phone in one hand. She noticed me too and waved enthusiastically. I rushed towards her, and we both stopped right in the middle of the crossing. "I was thinking of calling you and heading home because you were so late." "I was there too. I was waiting for you right on time over there," I said, pointing to our meeting spot. Suddenly, she burst out laughing. The pedestrian crosswalk signal started flashing with a beeping sound, and we both ran back to the sidewalk. "Alex, were you waiting over there?" I looked back at the beer hall named Penguin that she pointed to and silently nodded. "I was here. I was waiting here." "What?" She pointed out ahead at the department store we had chosen as our rendezvous point. Right in front of its entrance stood the department store symbol, a penguin statue. In other words, we had agreed to meet by the penguin in front of the department store. However, I mistook it for a beer hall named Penguin across the street from the department store, while Catherine thought of it as the penguin symbol at the entrance of the store. That's a funny mix-up. Glad we didn't miss each other. Yeah, seriously. Now that I think about it, I'm thirsty. How about we grab a drink at that beer hall to pay our respects to the penguin? Sounds good. Let's do it. Because it was a weekend, the beer hall was already nearly 80% full, even though it was just before 5 o'clock p.m. We ordered a big pint of draft beer and some hot dogs to snack on. We had another good laugh about the penguin confusion, and then started sharing more about ourselves. Turns out the station nearest to Catherine's old place and where I used to live up to 3 years ago was the same. There were 3 lines at that station, but we both used the same one for our daily commute. I always bought a sports newspaper from the kiosk in the mornings. Viewing the kiosk on the far west side of the platform. Yes, that's the one. As I nodded, Catherine mentioned she frequented that kiosk too. She always bought an energy drink there. I remembered. I hadn't noticed her face, but I had seen a woman buying that drink several times. When I guessed the brand of her energy drink, Catherine looked at me in surprise. Did you ever bump hands with someone when paying? Still in shock, Catherine nodded. I checked her commuting times. Our schedules overlapped, so we might have met at that kiosk at the station. I felt a strange connection with Catherine, and we planned another date for the following weekend. For our second date, we managed to meet on time without getting the location wrong. We had a meal at a casual diner and then shared a drink at a relaxed bar. I was quite the drinker, but she could hold her own as well. The conversation shifted to hobbies. I mentioned that while I hadn't been into it recently, I used to be really into watching plays a few years ago. I'm talking about small-time theater groups putting on shows at little venues. Nothing big. I didn't particularly have a favorite troupe. I just randomly attended a theater, picked up a flyer, and if it piqued my interest, I'd go watch that play. Next, it was the same old story. Depending on the play I went to see, sometimes it was fascinating and other times it was a letdown. The hits and misses varied greatly. I started mentioning the names of the troupes I remembered saying, this one was a hit, that one was a miss, and another was a complete dud. You've probably never heard of these troupes, have you? Ever since I began talking about the theater companies, Catherine seemed to speak less. I wondered if I bored her with topics she wasn't interested in. Do you know one of those troupes, really? That one. The total dud. I thought that company was as obscure as it gets. You know about such a company? When I asked, after a brief pause, she made a sour face and said, that theater group? It's the one my ex, who I broke up with 3 years ago, was involved in. I was taken aback and cleared my throat. In situations like this, should I take back what I said about being way off, or should I dig myself deeper? While I was at a loss for words, she spoke up first. I think I was there at the theater when you came to watch. I was helping out at the ticket counter. I'm not so sure about that. I remember arriving just in time that day, barely making it for the show. Our second date ended on an awkward note, yet we made plans to meet again the following weekend. Our third date began with a walk in a park in New York, known for its beautiful cherry blossoms in the spring. I used to come here often for company picnics. I've been here a few times with friends. I decided not to ask who those friends were. It might get awkward again if they were from the theater group. Although it wasn't cherry blossom season, the park was adorned with various flowers. Admiring flowers wasn't really my thing, so I quickly grew bored of the walk. Suddenly, carried by the wind, a savory aroma wafted towards us. It was coming from a food stand a little further ahead. That smells delicious, she whispered, eyeing her. I turned to look at her. I'm sorry, I've always been more of a pie than flowers person. Shrugging and smiling, quickly I added, to be honest, I was getting a bit bored looking at the park greenery too. How about we go get some hot dogs? Nodding in agreement, we walked briskly towards the food stall, our hips swaying as if we were race walkers. We bought a hot dog each and a can of beer, then sat on a nearby bench. We idly watched families playing on the park's grass, couples and people walking their dogs, taking a sip of the beer and a bite of the hot dog. Suddenly I noticed a particularly large cherry tree right next to the bench we were sitting on. Oh, I think it was around here that time. Was it the year before I transferred out of state, or the year before that? I had a company picnic around down here. Glancing around, I noticed a public restroom to our back left. It was definitely here. A new guy was in charge of securing the spot for a cherry blossom party. He told us that it was right in front of the restroom. I remember yelling at him, wondering why he'd picked such a smelly spot. That's thoughtful of him. When you're drinking, it's convenient to be close to the restroom, right? She had a point. However, I doubted the newbie had thought that far ahead when choosing the spot. Speaking of which, I once came here for a picnic and witnessed a fight between two guys over the restroom line. I had a similar experience. Was it in this park? Yes, it was this park. It might have even been that restroom. When I asked about the situation at that time, a young man who looked like a heavily intoxicated college student tried to cut in line for the restroom. A middle-aged man in a suit who was in line confronted the young man. Then a scuffle ensued. That's when another man who seemed to be an acquaintance of the man in the suit rushed over and managed to defuse the situation. Listening to her story, the memory of that time vividly came back to me. That man in the suit was my director, and the guy who stepped in later, that was me. Yours truly. You're kidding? You were there that day? Both of us were surprised and impressed by the unexpected connection from our past. A few days later, after work, my director invited me for a drink. We went to our usual large bar. As soon as we sat down, my director said, "How's it going with your arranged date? I heard you've met her a couple of times." I wasn't sure how to respond. I believed I had a good relationship with her. However, we had only been on 3 dates. I was indeed attracted to her, and I wanted to believe that she had some affection for me as well, but it was uncertain how things would turn out in the future. I talked to her, and it turns out we've unknowingly crossed paths before. I shared. Upon hearing this, he had a pleased expression on his face, as if to suggest it was a perfect match. Sounds like fate, doesn't it? Suddenly, a thought flashed through my mind. What if she's in this bar tonight too? There had been a few times in the past when we unexpectedly ran into each other, but if we met in this bar tonight, it wouldn't just be a coincidence. It might be destiny. I excused myself to him, saying I needed to use the restroom, and started searching the expansive bar. It was a tavern near the office. It wasn't surprising to see familiar faces. However, there were mostly strangers. That's to be expected, I thought, especially in a bustling city like New York. What were the odds of running into that one woman? Conveniently, I decided to give up on the silly fantasy and return to where my boss was seated. Just as I was about to turn around, there she was. "There you are," she remarked. "It's a coincidence, isn't it?" I shook my head and replied, "Does it really feel like just a coincidence to you?" She stared back at me with a broad smile on her face. Thank you for immersing yourself in our gripping tale. If you enjoyed the journey, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support means the world to us, and we can't wait to bring you more captivating stories. Stay tuned, and thank you for being part of our community.